Hello, this is Charles, and this is Chapter 7 of Going Home. Chapter 6 was rather uneventful, really. Nathan caught a lot of flack from his boss about the progress he's making, and they made it the other side of Chicago. Now, what happens next in Chapter 7? Find out coming up. Chapter 7. Nathan finally screwed up the courage to ask Phoebe out, and surprisingly, she immediately said yes. His heart didn't just skip a beat, it danced a jig right there in his chest, and he was filled with happiness he thought he could never know. What they couldn't figure out was where to go on their first date, until she surprised him by suggesting Cracker Barrel. Of all the places to go on a date, why did she want to go there? Cracker Barrel was a fine place to grab a meal, sure, but it was not the place he imagined going on a first date. Maybe something a little more upscale with cloth napkins and candlelight? Someplace a bit more romantic? No, that's where she wanted to go. And she was being surprisingly insistent on going there. Right away, so it seemed. I'm hungry and ready for breakfast, she was saying. Then Phoebe's face started to fade, and it was no longer her voice he was hearing, but that of his grandmother, gently shaking him awake and wanting to get breakfast. His mind swam up from the depths of his dream, most unwillingly, and finally he sat up in bed, somewhat awake. There you are, Nate, finally with us. We forgot to set an alarm and we appear to have overslept. We ought to be going. Grandma, it's Central Time here. Oh, okay, but we've still had enough sleep and I'm getting hungry. 30 minutes later, they were indeed sitting in Cracker Barrel, waiting on their breakfast to arrive and discussing the next leg of the trip. Myrtle inquired, Where's that big mall? Is that on the way? The Mall of America? That's in Minneapolis, he said as he was checking mileage on his iPad. About 5 hours from here, but it would add a few miles to our trip. We'd have to make our way back down to 90 from there. Might add 3 hours to the trip. Well, I was wanting to see it, but I don't know about adding that much time to the trip. You do need to get back to work. You know what, Grandma? I do need to get back to work, but I told Frank what was up, but I'm not going to cut short our trip. If you want to go there, we'll stop there. Well, what about work, Nate? You're not irreplaceable. I know, but that's a two-way street. No job is irreplaceable either. And your family. Family comes first. I appreciate that, Nate, but you have to think about your future. I won't be around forever, you know. And that's why I want to make the most of whatever time we have. I can always get another job. I can't always get another grandma. Then their food arrived, and the conversation took a back seat to eating breakfast. When they had finished, paid the bill, and gotten back to the car, Nathan picked up right where they had left off. He had a knack for doing that, and it sometimes caught people off guard. Something started had to be finished, and if he was interrupted, he had been known to pick up an old train of thought a day later, almost as if he had never moved on while the other party had forgotten all about the unfinished conversation. Patrick had been the same way, thought Myrtle. I've been thinking about family and priorities and all that, he said as he was pulling out of the parking lot. People prioritize things above their families, and then when someone is taken from you, the regrets come. What do you regret? Do you wish you could have spent more time away from that person, or that you could have worked more? No. You regret the thing you never said when you had the chance. You wish you had another hour, another day, another week, just to tell that person one more time how you felt. But you don't have another chance, and you don't realize it until it's too late. You have some of those regrets, Nate? You bet I do. You're not supposed to lose your parents when you're only 14. I never saw that coming. How often do you think I wish I could have said more to them? Told them more how much I loved them and appreciated them, but no, I don't have that chance. And when I had the chance, I was a stupid teenager who didn't think that was important. I didn't know I wouldn't have the opportunities later. One minute I have parents that are getting on my nerves, and the next day they're gone. And now that I'm a little older and appreciate them, they're not around for me to tell them. It was kind of the same with Grandpa, but at least I had some good talks with him and was able to say mostly what I felt. So there aren't as many regrets there, but with Mom and Dad, I'm not making that same mistake again. Oh, Nate, I miss your dad a lot more than you know. After all, he was my son, and parents aren't supposed to bury their kids. I'm sure he knew how you felt. Maybe he did, but I never really got to tell him once I figured it all out. That chance was taken from me, and I don't know. I just feel cheated. I don't know what to tell you, honey. That's part of life, though. Sometimes people leave us too soon, and there are always regrets. There was always something more we could have said or done. I would love to have one more day with your grandfather to tell him how much I love him. I never felt like it was said enough, especially the last few years when we both pretty much knew where things stood. You never feel like you said or did enough until it's too late. But you had a whole life with Grandpa, and I only had 14 years. And now, I can't do anything about it. But I still have you left, and I don't want to have the same regrets later. So we're going to take as much time as we need on this trip. So if you want the detour to see some giant mall, we'll stop at that mall. And then Mount Rushmore and whatever else looks interesting on the way. And if Frank doesn't like that, well, Nate, you maybe ought to set that cruise control before you have another regret. The police aren't as forgiving. He looked down and realized he was doing over 80, so he backed it off and set the cruise. The remains of yesterday's storm had finally left them, and the drive north through Wisconsin was certainly more relaxing than last night's drive in the rain. Nathan had never been to Wisconsin before and found the drive rather enjoyable. You ever been through here, Grandma? Your grandpa and I went up to Milwaukee once, but I've never been in this part of the state. It's quite pretty. Yes, it is. Just let me know when you need to stop. Looks like there are a lot of towns between here and Minneapolis. Myrtle started to take her journal out, but she put it down and just stared out the window, enjoying the rolling hills of central Wisconsin in the late summer. She was thinking about what Nathan had been saying earlier, about regretting the things he hadn't said to his parents. This had been her experience as well. She hadn't lost her parents young like he had, but she still found herself with many things left unsaid at their passing, and now all of a sudden it was coming back. He had dug it up with his words, and now she was feeling a bit of the same sadness that Nathan had spoken of. Why was it that people often took one another for granted until it was too late? Perhaps that was the way with most people. You just had these people in your life who made it better, and you assumed that was the way things were supposed to be. You never really tell people how much you appreciate them until it's too late. Maybe you do so more with friends than with family, but she was now wondering if that wasn't the case with most relationships people have. She thought of all those people she had lost over the years. Her friend Shirley, who had died in an auto accident in her 20s. Her parents and grandparents. Several high school classmates, her son Martin and his wife, even several pets she had over the years. How many of them had she simply taken for granted? Like they were just part of her life, meant to be there, and that they knew what they meant to her. Nathan had figured that out early, but she now realized that she had been doing what Nathan was regretting, and that she had done so her entire life. That was often the way with people. Most people go through their lives chasing deadlines or chasing things they think they need, only to realize too late that they missed out on what is most important in life. You get to the end of your life and you start taking stock, and you realize that the things you often overlooked were the most important things, and the things you strove for were the least important. The moments that seemed like interludes in your life were in reality the most important moments, and those moments you thought were the all-important goals turned out to be the unimportant interludes. Those conversations you had with your grandma on her front porch, when you really wanted to be playing, all of those quiet times between the big moments of your life, those were the important moments. Those were the times that really defined you. Those were the moments that stick out when you realize that more of your life is behind you than is in front of you, and you want to figure out if any of it really meant anything. Now it made sense. What did she remember the most about the years she had with her husband? Was it the big moments, the vacations they took together, or the time she watched him play football back in college? No. As much as those moments were fun, it was the quiet conversations they had sitting on the couch, sometimes not talking about anything important, but just being in one another's presence. It was the dinners they had in the house, times they just sat there in companionable silence and didn't even speak, going to the shelter to pick out a puppy and coming back with a puppy and a kitten because they couldn't choose between the two, watching the two romp around the house in reckless abandon and the laughter they had at their antics. Their marriage thrived not in the big moments, but in the small, everyday moments that seemed so unimportant at the time, but that now flooded her memories. They strove to make the big moments, but the small moments made them. Nathan looked over and saw the faraway look on his grandma's face and wondered what she was thinking about. As much as he thought he knew her, there was way more about her that he never really knew, and he realized at that moment that she was more important than the job he was going back to. She was a deeper woman than he ever imagined, and a wise woman as well. He had always figured that people her age simply acquired wisdom by virtue of having lived that long. But he saw in her that it wasn't entirely the sum of the years lived, but what she did with those years. Yes, he loved his grandmother, but like other people in his life, he hadn't always been too good at telling her. He was an introvert, and he knew the limitations that put on him. But there was only so far he could let that hinder him. At least understanding that part of his personality had helped him to a degree. He understood why he was uncomfortable staying too long at parties, and why he spent so much time in introspection. This trip was a fine example. As much as he had some wonderful conversations with his grandmother, they had also covered several hours of driving in total silence. Her lost in her journal writing and he in his thoughts. Maybe he spent too much time in his own head. He had passed Madison a few miles ago, had seen signs for towns like Waunakee and DeForest, was coming up on an exit leading to Lodi, and was seeing several billboards advertising attractions at Wisconsin Dells. Indoor water parks? Yeah, that would never fly where he lived in California. These people knew what to do with the long winters, he figured. No time to stop and check those out, though, not if he wanted to get to the mall and give his grandma some time to walk around the place before it closed. Maybe they should have gotten out of bed earlier. They rolled right on past Wisconsin Dells, past Malston, New Lisbon, and Toma, when Myrtle announced her need for a restroom. They came before too long to Black River Falls, and Nathan pulled into the Flying J and parked in one of the RV spots, right next to a Winnebago that looked like it had passed its prime 25 years ago. The Winnebago was idling but had thick curtains in all the windows, which led Nathan to believe that the occupants were probably sleeping, which he found odd for the early afternoon. Maybe they had been driving all night to beat traffic. He realized he had to use the restroom as well, but he decided to wait for his grandmother to get back so he could leave the car running and keep the air conditioning going. It was becoming a rather warm day and he didn't want to shut it off. Finally, Myrtle came back and asked Nathan if he planned on topping off the gas while they were there, to which he replied, "Not a bad idea. Let me just go in and take a pee real quick and then I'll grab a pump." The occupants of the old Winnebago were indeed sleeping through the day, but not for the reasons Nathan had surmised. They had also been on something of a road trip, starting out in Los Angeles and passing through Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, up through Idaho to Montana, across Montana and North Dakota, down through Minnesota, and now into Wisconsin. Only the driver knew their final destination, and he wasn't sharing the information with anyone. It was one truck stop after another, no more than 1 or 2 nights at each location, normally driving from early morning to early afternoon and sleeping through the afternoon until evening. It was the evenings that Cassie Ferguson dreaded. There had been another girl, a teenager named Melanie, but she had been given over to someone else in St. Paul. They were held against her will by a smelly, unkempt man in his 50s, known only as Mike. Mike used threats against family members as leverage to try to keep her in line. How he knew so much about her family, she had no idea. but the threat seemed real enough. Cassie was awake at the moment. She wanted to cry, but the tears had all but dried up at this point. She was becoming hardened to her situation, which had been a living hell these last few weeks since being abducted near her home in Long Beach. She was only 18, just out of high school, and working as a server at a small diner not far from home, hoping to start college if she could save up enough money. She was a very attractive girl, and when a man she waited on at the diner, claiming to be a Hollywood agent, told her about an audition coming up, she jumped at the chance. He said all the right things, and she dared to dream. By the time she and the other girls who showed up for the audition figured out what was really happening, it was too late. Cassie had been forced to do unspeakable things since then, sometimes with private customers and sometimes at truck stops. Most of the truckers declined, but enough paid to make the venture profitable, at least for Mike and a man who Mike reported to, a man who no doubt had more Mikes reporting to him and giving him a share of the profits. She saw none of the money, and she really cared nothing for the money anyway. She wanted free of this hell. Lot lizards, they were called. The derogatory slur people in the trucking industry called young women like her. She overheard enough conversations between Mike and his employer to get the gist of what their plan was. The idea was to service the West Coast only, but the law had gotten close on a couple occasions, so now they were making their way across the country in an effort to distance themselves and then maybe set up operations in another state. Cassie twisted herself in her bunk to try to get more comfortable. Mike had taken to handcuffing the girls to their bunks during the day since Melanie had tried to run away in Montana. She didn't get far, and 2 days later Mike followed through on his threat and Melanie's sister was involved in an accident. That ended any other escape attempts, but the handcuffs were used since then as an extra precaution. Cassie heard another vehicle parked next to them, right next to the window her bunk was near. With enough wiggling in the bunk, she managed to get her face next to the heavy curtain, and eventually she was able to get her free hand to the edge of the curtain as well. The curtains would not be drawn since Mike had fastened the edges to the wall of the RV, but with enough working back and forth, trying to remain as quiet as possible so as not to wake Mike, she managed to tear the corner free and eventually one whole side of the curtain. She pressed her face up to the glass and looked out. Parked next to the RV was a Chevy Tahoe with a U-Haul trailer hooked on and a young man sitting in the driver's seat. Cassie dared not make too much noise for fear of being discovered by Mike, but she needed to get this man's attention somehow. She needed him to notice her, and notice that all was not well. She had no paper or anything to write a note with, so that was out of the question, and rapping on the window would certainly wake Mike, so that wouldn't work either. She just stared out the window and willed the stranger to turn his head and notice her. There, he saw her. Hopefully he would figure it out. He smiled back and waved, then went back to looking straight ahead. Darn, she thought. He just thinks I'm being friendly. She then went to moving the curtain around, and he looked a bit longer this time. Just then, a petite elderly lady came out and got in the passenger seat, had a brief conversation with the young man, and he got out and went inside. Cassie kept moving the curtain and staring at the Tahoe, and eventually the woman looked over, taking a much longer look than the young man had. As Nathan was walking inside to use the restroom, Myrtle looked over at the Winnebago parked next to them and saw a young girl staring out the window at her. She had one hand on the curtain and was attempting to wave the curtain around, but it appeared that only part of the curtain was loose. She thought there was something right odd about this girl. She looked quite young, probably in her late teens, and was quite pretty. Would look prettier if she didn't look so uptight about something. She looked scared, that was it. The girl looked downright terrified. Myrtle's heart told her that this girl needed her help, but she was not quite sure what was going on or how to help. She got out of the vehicle and walked over toward the RV. The girl took her hand and held a finger up to her lips, and Myrtle immediately understood that she couldn't make any sound. Myrtle had seen something on TV once about trafficking, and although she couldn't be sure, she thought this was what was going on. Just then, Nathan was returning from the restroom and started to say something, but Myrtle put her finger to her lips to silence him and came close to him and said, "Did you notice that girl looking out of that window over there?" "Yeah, she seems friendly. She was waving." "Take a closer look. Something's not right." "Yeah, she looks kind of scared of something. Remember that piece on the news the other day about trafficking? You think that's what's going on? That girl is terrified. Just look at her. She motioned for me to keep quiet, so I'm thinking that the person holding her is probably asleep in there. We can call the police, but I don't know how long it will take them to get here, and we don't want him waking up and taking off. Look at how he's parked. There's not enough room to back that thing out of that spot. He'd have to pull forward to get out. Hop in." Myrtle and Nathan got in the car, and Nathan pulled forward and then parked broadside in front of the RV, blocking it in from being able to pull out. Myrtle smiled approvingly, as did the girl in the window, and Myrtle already had her cell phone out and was dialing 911. "911, what's your emergency?" "I'm at the Flying J on... What's this road, Nate? Highway 54? There's an old RV here, a Winnebago it looks like. And there's a young girl peeking out the window looking scared as hell. I think she's been kidnapped." "Can you talk to the girl?" "No. She's motioning to keep quiet. I think the kidnapper is in there asleep and she doesn't want to wake him. But she's sure been trying to keep my attention. She's young and looks very scared." "Okay, ma'am, I'm getting an officer headed that way. Is this a good number to contact you if we need to?" Yes, it is." "Okay, we have an officer close by. He should be there shortly." 5 minutes later, 2 squad cars came into the parking lot, lights flashing, and parked either side of the RV. One officer positioned himself near the door of the RV, and the other approached Myrtle. "Officer Murphy, ma'am, you the lady who called?" the officer asked her. "Yes, officer. Something's up with that RV. You see the girl in the window?" The officer took one look and said to his partner, "We need to get in there ASAP." The other officer drew his weapon, and they made quick work of the lock on the door and opened it quietly. What they saw inside made their blood boil. There were cots along the walls, and on one of them was the girl who had been looking out the window. On a cot in the back was the man responsible, sprawled out and snoring loudly. Murphy approached and resisted the urge to beat the man to a pulp, instead simply slapping him to wake him up. When Mike woke up, he found himself looking straight at the stern face of Officer Murphy, holding a pair of handcuffs and saying, "You have the right to remain silent." Outside, the other officer found Nathan standing there and approached him. "Are you the one who parked in front of him?" the officer asked. "Yep, didn't want him pulling away before you got here." "That was quick thinking. I don't think I had the pleasure of getting your name." "Nathan, sir." "It's Jones, Nathan. Officer Kevin Jones." "Is the other lady with you there? The one who called us?" "Yeah, that's my grandma." "Your grandma's a hero, Nathan." "Yeah, she's pretty special. I wouldn't trade her for the world." Well, I hope you enjoyed Chapter 7. If so, please like and subscribe. Now, just a little note about the end of that chapter. I spent some years driving over the road, and so I'm familiar with that particular truck stop. And there was a story about a trucker who pulled in and saw a trafficking victim being held in an RV and called it in, and she was rescued. And I heard that story, so I decided to put it into this book, just fictionalizing the names of the people involved. So that is indeed a real event. It did not happen at that truck stop, but this is an event that happened and something we should all be aware of, and so we should be observant in case we spot things like that. So anyway, stay tuned for more chapters coming up, and I will see you the next time around.